There is a stretch of water 21 miles wide that sits between Iran and Oman. On a map, it looks like a minor geographic detail, a narrow gap between two landmasses at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. But approximately 20% of the world's traded oil passes through it every single day. Liquefied natural gas, petrochemicals, fertilizers, sulfur, helium, all of it moves through those 21 miles. And right now, that passage is effectively closed. Not metaphorically, not partially, operationally closed, in a way that has trapped approximately 900 deep draft vessels inside the Persian Gulf with no clear path out. I've been watching this situation develop for weeks, and the more I look at it, the more I think most people fundamentally misunderstand what is actually happening here, not just politically, but physically, legally, and logistically. So let me walk you through it from the beginning. To understand how 900 ships end up trapped, you first need to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is and why it cannot simply be bypassed. The strait is the only maritime exit from the Persian Gulf. There is no alternative sea route. The overland pipelines that exist, the East-West pipeline moving Saudi crude to Yanbu on the Red Sea, the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline running to Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, have a combined capacity of roughly 5.5 million barrels per day. The Persian Gulf normally exports somewhere between 18 and 20 million barrels of oil per day by sea. The pipelines can move perhaps a quarter of that. Everything else has to go through the strait or it doesn't move at all. This is not a situation where the market can route around the problem. The infrastructure to do so doesn't exist and cannot be built on any timeline that matters for the current crisis. When I think about what it means for a strait this critical to be closed, I keep coming back to one analogy. Imagine if every highway, rail line, and air corridor serving a major industrial region were simultaneously shut down, and the only bypass routes had the capacity to move about 25% of normal traffic. That is approximately the situation we are looking at right now in the Persian Gulf. So how did we get here? The short version is this. Following the outbreak of hostilities between the United States, Israel, and Iran, the Iranian government, specifically the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, began exercising control over vessel movements through the strait. This control took several forms. Ships were directed away from the established traffic separation scheme, the internationally recognized lanes that organize inbound and outbound traffic through the strait, and into new lanes running through Iranian territorial waters. Vessels were boarded. Transit was conditioned on compliance with IRGC instructions, and a toll system was established, requiring payment to Iranian authorities as a condition of passage. That last element is legally significant in a way I want to come back to, but the practical effect was immediate. Shipping companies stopped sending vessels into the Persian Gulf because they could not guarantee safe exit. The ships already inside had no way out, and the queue of vessels waiting at the mouth of the strait in the Gulf of Oman and the northern Arabian Sea began to grow. Now, 900 vessels is a number that sounds abstract until you start breaking it down by cargo type. I've looked at the fleet composition data coming out of maritime intelligence platforms, and what it shows is the full cross-section of global commodity trade bottled up inside a single body of water. Crude oil tankers, product tankers carrying refined fuels, chemical tankers, liquefied natural gas carriers, liquefied petroleum gas vessels, container ships carrying manufactured goods, bulk carriers loaded with grain, iron ore, and coal. The Kuwait Petroleum Corporation exported 0 barrels of oil in the month of April. 0. The last time Kuwait achieved that particular milestone was August of 1990, when Iraqi forces had just invaded and occupied the country. That statistic tells you more about the severity of this situation than any oil price chart. It's not just Iran's exports that are affected, it's every producer in the Persian Gulf, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, southern Iraq, and elements of Saudi and UAE production, all of it backed up with nowhere to go. The legal dimension of what Iran is doing in the strait matters and deserves more attention than it usually gets in coverage of this crisis. The Strait of Hormuz is subject to what international maritime law calls transit passage rights. Under Article 37 of UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, ships of all nations have the right of transit passage through straits used for international navigation. Transit passage is different from innocent passage. It cannot be suspended by the coastal state, it cannot be conditioned on prior authorization, and critically, it cannot be subjected to tolls or fees. Iran has not ratified UNCLOS. But even setting that aside, the convention in this area largely codified customary international law that predates the 1982 treaty. The Iranian position, that it has the right to regulate, redirect, and charge for passage through the strait, has no recognized basis in international maritime law. What Iran is doing is legally equivalent to a state declaring that it controls an international airway and charging aircraft for the right to fly through it. The International Maritime Organization has said exactly this. The IMO Secretary General addressed the UN Security Council on this point directly. What he said was clear. Transit passage rights in the Strait of Hormuz are non-negotiable under international law, and the imposition of tolls by any coastal state is categorically impermissible. I agree with that position, and I note it with some interest because I don't always agree with the IMO. There is a second blockade running simultaneously, and this is where the situation becomes genuinely complicated to analyze. The United States has established its own enforcement perimeter in the Gulf of Oman and the northern Arabian Sea. American naval forces have been redirecting vessels away from Iranian ports, boarding ships suspected of carrying cargo in violation of sanctions, and in at least 2 documented cases, the Majestic X and the Tiffany, seizing vessels outright. As of early May, 49 commercial vessels had been redirected under this operation. The legal basis the United States is using for these actions is a combination of existing sanctions authority and, for the seizures, Article 110 of UNCLOS, which permits boarding of stateless vessels, vessels flying false flags, or operating without valid registration. The 2 seized tankers were determined to be stateless, which provided the legal hook for their capture. What we have, then, is 2 competing enforcement regimes operating at the entrance to the same waterway. Iran controlling passage from inside, the United States controlling approach from outside, and approximately 900 ships caught between them, with their commercial operators trying to calculate which set of rules applies to their vessel, their cargo, and their flag state, and whether compliance with one regime triggers sanctions under the other. This is not a situation that has a clean legal resolution. It is a situation that was created by the collision of incompatible legal frameworks, and it will not be resolved by legal argument alone. The economic consequences are already visible in the data and will become significantly more visible in the months ahead. Global oil supply dropped by 10.1 million barrels per day in March, according to the International Energy Agency's April report. Global observed oil inventories fell by 85 million barrels in the same period. Oil on water, crude and products in transit between producers and consumers plunged by 107 million barrels, as the effective closure of the strait reduced oil in transit by 181 million barrels. The offset to some of this is that oil is accumulating in storage inside the Persian Gulf region. Producers have nowhere to sell it, so it is sitting in onshore tanks and in vessels being used as floating storage near Karg Island. This provides a temporary buffer, but storage has physical limits, and when those limits are reached, producers must either curtail production or find other outlets that don't currently exist at the necessary scale. The UAE's decision to leave OPEC in this period is directly connected to this dynamic. The UAE wants to increase production and export through Fujairah, bypassing the strait via its overland pipeline, and OPEC's production constraints were preventing that. By leaving, they free themselves to maximize what they can move through the alternative route. It is a rational response to an irrational situation. I understand the decision, even if the timing is unusual. One element of this crisis that has received less attention than it deserves is what it is doing to shipping markets beyond the Persian Gulf. When 900 vessels are trapped inside a single body of water, those are 900 vessels that are not available to move cargo anywhere else in the world. Tanker rates on routes that have nothing to do with the Persian Gulf have moved because the effective global supply of available tonnage has contracted. Insurance premiums for vessels operating anywhere in the region, including the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the Arabian Sea, have increased sharply. The Somali piracy situation, which had been largely suppressed since its peak between 2005 and 2012, has resurged. Multiple vessels have been seized off the Somali coast in recent weeks. My read on this is that it is not coordinated with Iranian operations. It is a separate, opportunistic response to the disruption in regional supply chains. Somalia is one of the countries furthest from the front of any supply queue, and fuel and commodity shortages there are creating conditions that historically produce piracy. When I see a bulk carrier seized off Somalia carrying fuel, I'm not seeing an Iranian proxy operation. I'm seeing the downstream consequence of a supply chain disruption that has reached far enough to destabilize marginal economies in the region. Where does this leave the 900 ships? In the near term, some vessels have begun moving. There are reports of individual tankers transiting out through Omani territorial waters south of the traffic separation scheme, either with tacit Iranian permission, by paying the toll, or under conditions that aren't fully transparent from the available data. The United States launched an operation called Project Freedom, which I'll cover in detail in a separate video, involving naval escorts and a defined security corridor through the strait. The first confirmed result of that operation was the extraction of 2 American-flagged vessels that had been trapped since the beginning of the crisis. 2 out of 900 is a start. Whether it becomes a systematic solution depends on variables that are still being resolved. The willingness of other flag states to participate, the level of Iranian resistance to escort operations, the status of mine-clearing efforts in the traffic separation scheme, and the outcome of negotiations between Washington and Tehran that have so far failed to separate the nuclear file from the shipping file. I don't think this resolves quickly. The structural conditions that produced it, the competing blockades, the absence of a unified international response, the legal vacuum around transit passage enforcement, are not going to be removed by a single diplomatic agreement or a single convoy operation. This is going to take time. And in the meantime, the ships wait. That brings up a question I haven't addressed yet in this video, and it's one that I think deserves its own treatment. If the United States can extract 2 of its own flagged vessels from the Persian Gulf using naval escorts, what is the actual mechanism for doing that? How do you convoy a commercial ship through a contested strait? Who makes the decisions on the bridge? And what happens if the escort comes under fire? The operational details of how Project Freedom was actually executed, the role of military sea lift command, the convoy commodore structure, the secure communications problem, are more interesting and more complicated than the headlines suggest. That's the next video.